Hello and welcome to Module 2, Editor's Techniques. To write is human, to edit is divine. This is a quote from Stephen King. Now, I can say, I didn't expect him to say that. What I did expect him to say was, to edit is king. Nonetheless, a good editor makes writing sing. Module 2, Editor's Techniques. Let's take a look at the agenda. Today we're going to talk about difference between editing and proofreading. We know that there's some controversy about that. Some people think they're the same thing. I think that there's a slight difference, and we'll talk about that inside. The purpose of editor's marks. As an editor, you will use standard symbols to mark up the draft manuscript, and these symbols are like editor's language or codes, and I will show you how to crack these codes inside. We'll also talk about types of editor's marks. In this training, you will learn two types of editor's marks, punctuation and typographical. We'll spend a significant amount of time in this area because here is where the real work begins. And then finally, systematic proofreading strategies. As I mentioned earlier, proofreading is slightly different than editing, and we're going to follow a systematic approach to correcting errors in a document. So let's begin. Module 2, Lesson 1, Difference between Editing and Proofreading. Webster's Dictionary defines editing as a preparation of the author's work, a manuscript for publication by selecting, arranging, revising, rearranging, or even deleting. Not all parts of a manuscript require handling, and that's why it's necessary to be very selective about which information is manipulated. Sometimes the editor has to select words, phrases, sentences, and even whole paragraphs to make necessary adjustments. And revising a passage of information or a whole paragraph is an aspect of editing. Likewise, the editor will need to decide whether it's necessary to arrange whole paragraphs or even sections of a manuscript to ensure logical organization. And the most intense change that an editor will make is to delete any portion of the manuscript. It harkens back to what we discussed in Module 1, to have a respect for the author's voice. And before ever deleting large amounts of information, communicate with your author to be in sync with her vision for the book. Again, according to Webster's Dictionary, proofreading means to read and mark corrections. Editors typically correct the following errors under mechanics of style, like punctuation marks, for example, commas, colons, semicolons, periods, question marks, hyphens, parentheses, capitalizations, double or single quotation marks. Additional links will be inserted into your resource section of this module regarding punctuation. Now, the work that was done to make the changes in the document is called deep level editing. So that's what you're going to be doing. You're going to go in very deep and you're going to look at the information closely. Extreme carefulness is taken into consideration at this stage, and proofreading is the process to ensure that nothing is overlooked. Module 2, Lesson 2, Purpose of Editor's Marks. The editor's marks are recognized in the industry as a language of its own. Each mark has a symbol and a particular function to assist the editor with continuity throughout the document. So what this means is you are going to be utilizing these symbols throughout the paper, throughout the manuscript, as you're going through line by line. This happens in stages. So the stage that you will be adding these marks is really considered stage 1. Stage 2 then is to go behind and clean the document up with the mark references that you have applied. Use a systematic approach for identifying punctuation errors. We'll cover more of this process in the next few slides of the module. Now, editor's marks help to illuminate and clarify sentence structure. Lesson 2, Lesson 3, Types of Editor's Marks. There are two types of editor's marks, punctuation and typographical. Let's start with punctuation. Now, I've been hinting all along that we will give due attention to punctuation errors, but I wanted to add one more term to that, and that's typographical marks. Typographical marks generally aid the editor in how to manipulate the language on the page. Punctuation marks are well-mannered symbols that lead us around like faithful butlers. Remove them and we dance free form. This is a statement by Nanette Avery. And it's true. We use punctuation marks to guide us, to direct us in terms of how we pause, how we stop, how we ask and become inquisitive. And we need those punctuation marks, but we need them to be in the right place. Next, we're going to talk about the editor's mark. And I have a guide for you that we'll take a quick look at, and I'll walk you through some of the marks that you will be implementing in your documents. If you take a look at the sheet, you'll notice that the first table is the punctuation mark, and the second table is the typographical marks. So let's start with the first table. In the first column, we have symbols, and in the second column, we have the meaning of each of these symbols. So we'll walk through these one at a time just so that you get clarity on these marks. The first one is when you need to insert a period. Sometimes the author may forget to add periods where they're needed. You will use that symbol to represent you're going to insert a period in this area. We also want to show how to insert a comma by using the caret symbol, and we'll talk about the caret symbol again in the next section, and adding the comma underneath the caret symbol. That symbolically represents an insertion of a comma. The equal sign and the slash mark represents the need for a hyphen. And if you notice, everywhere there's a slash symbol, you're actually inserting that particular punctuation mark. So you have your double period, which is considered the colon. The period and comma is the semicolon. The apostrophe is raised, so the caret is upside down to show it is being inserted. Then you have your exclamation point. So this is where you're going to use a slash for the exclamation point to show that this is where we want to insert an exclamation point. And that goes for question marks, in dashes. And let me just stop here and talk about the in dashes and the on dash. When you have an on dash, you're really saying this is a short dash. If you have a longer dash, then you would say M dash. And if you have two M dashes, then there are two long dashes. So there's a distinction between the three of those. And then of course your parentheses, double quotation, and single quotation. Now I want to make a note about the quotation marks here. Quotation marks are used when you have a single quote. But if you have an embedded quote within those double quotation marks, then you need to use single quotation marks to represent that it is an isolated quote within the larger quotation. Okay, let's move on to typographical marks. Again, we have our symbol column, and we have our meaning column. As you can tell, there's quite a bit here. And you don't have to memorize all of these. You do want to make sure you have a reference guide to keep alongside of you as you're doing your editing. There will be a copy of this posted in your resource section. Module 2, Lesson 4, Systematic Proofreading Strategies. So make a checklist of what you intend to review and isolate types of errors under review and approach them one at a time. Now that seems like quite a bit of work to do, and in fact it is. So sometimes in a list, you might want to add punctuation to review, mechanics to review, grammar, sentence structure, and that's critical. Word choice, spelling errors, and the list is ongoing. These are just a few samples of what you might put in a checklist. Now, I recommend that if you are not comfortable with doing them all simultaneously, then do them one at a time. So go through the document one at a time, approaching each one of these kinds of items to be reviewed. For example, I might spend the first round of reading the draft just looking for punctuation errors. But if you are more advanced and you have a little background in understanding editor's marks, you can do this in a way where you read each line of your text and simultaneously you're catching all types of errors that appear in that line, and you're not doing them one at a time, but you're doing them together holistically. I only recommend that for those of you who are advanced in understanding editor's marks or who have a background in English and standard English writing. When you isolate errors, you want to make sure you're navigating using your checklist. This is important. It keeps you on target, it keeps you focused. Review the document from the lens of the first item in your checklist without deviating. I think that some people feel comfortable moving around and just glancing at it. And I recommend that you stay focused and stay on track so that you make sure you're thorough every step of the way. And use your editor's marks wherever possible. I would recommend having that guide printed out sitting next to you while you're editing the document. In summary, we talked about differentiating between editing and proofreading, using editor's marks, and systematic proofreading skills. We also learned that when you differentiate between editing and proofreading, it does take a lot more time to edit the document because what you're doing is you're going through it and you're marking the text specifically how you want to rearrange, organize, look at the global impact of what the author is writing. And it takes time to do that. You want to be patient with yourself and you want to be patient with your author because this is the real work that the editor does. But in the final analysis, you will have created what the author really dreamed of because your work helps bring it all together and make it succinct and make it read where others will be able to enjoy what that author wrote. Congratulations, you have just completed a major part of your training, how to edit the document. I'll see you in the next module.